Donald Trump is a lifelong criminal who's been mostly successful at not getting caught. I maintain my view that America is a lawless nation with mainly lawsuits available to hold people accountable. From the 1970s until he was elected president in 2016, Donald Trump and his businesses were involved in over 4,000 legal cases in United States federal and state courts, including battles with casino patrons, million-dollar real estate lawsuits, personal defamation lawsuits, and over 100 business tax disputes. Since the 1970s, at least 26 women have publicly accused Trump of rape, kissing and groping without consent, looking under women's skirts and walking in on naked teenage pageant contestants. There's also E. Jean Carroll, who was raped by him in 1996 in a department store. She was awarded $5 million in a judgment last May. Jurors also found Trump liable for defaming Carroll over her allegations. Donald Trump took credit for the elimination of Roe v. Wade, embracing his role in selecting the Supreme Court justices who were instrumental in ending the half-century precedent that protected abortion rights nationwide. After 50 years of failure with nobody coming even close, I was able to kill Roe v. Wade, Trump said on his Truth social media platform. In April 2023, Trump became the first sitting or former president in U.S. history to answer to criminal charges following an investigation into an alleged hush money payment he made to adult film star Stormy Daniels while he was a presidential candidate in 2016. The Manhattan DA's office brought an unprecedented case against Trump in April 2023 that aimed to prove that he not only falsified 34 financial records with intent to defraud, but also to make that hush money payment to Stormy Daniels in the final days of his 2016 presidential election, but that he did so in order to conceal a second crime which elevated the charges from misdemeanors to felonies. In August that year, he was hit with a third indictment related to his actions leading up to the January 6 Capitol riot, following the most wide-ranging Justice Department investigation in history. And just 2 weeks later, he was indicted in Georgia alongside 18 of his allies over attempts to overturn the state's 2020 election results. The indictment alleged that Trump, after losing the 2020 presidential election, was determined to remain in power. Prosecutors alleged that Trump engaged in a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election results by using knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the federal government's function by which those results are collected, counted, and certified. Per the indictment, Trump allegedly conspired to corruptly obstruct and impede the certification of the electoral vote taking place on the 6th of January 2021. Among the most serious charges is a violation of Georgia's RICO Act, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a charge most often associated with organized crime. Trump was charged with one count of conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, a charge that stems from the so-called fake elector scheme, in which a false slate of electors was submitted to lawmakers claiming Trump won Georgia's election, despite that he did not. A nationwide review conducted by ABC News has identified at least 54 criminal cases where Donald Trump was invoked in direct connection with violent acts, threats of violence, or allegations of assault. After a Latino gas station attendant in Gainesville, Florida, was suddenly punched in the head by a white man, the victim could be heard on surveillance camera recounting the attacker's own words. He said, "This is for Trump." Charges were filed, but the victim stopped pursuing them. When police questioned a Washington state man about his threats to kill a local Syrian-born man, the suspect told police he wanted the victim to get out of my country, adding, "That's why I like Trump." Reviewing police reports and court records, ABC News found that in at least 12 cases, perpetrators held Trump in the midst or immediate aftermath of physically assaulting innocent victims. In another 18 cases, perpetrators cheered or defended Trump while taunting or threatening others. And in another 10 cases, Trump and his rhetoric were cited in court to explain a defendant's violent or threatening behavior. The perpetrators and suspects identified in the 54 cases are mostly white men, as young as teenagers and as old as 75, while the victims largely represent an array of minority groups, African Americans, Latinos, Muslims, and gay men. Trump said that he deserves no blame for what he called the hatred seemingly coursing through parts of the country. He told reporters that he's committed to doing everything in his power to not let political violence take root in America, despite inciting violence at every opportunity. Trump, unconstrained by checks and balances, concocted a plan to ramp tensions with Iran so he could distract from his impeachment, and ordered a drone attack that killed General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's top military and political leaders in Baghdad. Iran's military was in a state of heightened readiness when an air defense system incorrectly identified Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 as an incoming cruise missile and shot the jet down. All 176 people on board were killed, including 82 Iranians and 62 Canadians. Collateral damage from Trump's irresponsible, dangerous, ill-conceived behavior. Many of the victims' families blamed Trump for cancelling the Iran nuclear deal, which largely contained Iran. In his final hours in office, after a year of presidential denials of reality and responsibility, the COVID pandemic's U.S. death toll eclipsed 400,000. Many of these deaths were attributed to Trump's incompetence and dishonesty about the virus. He failed to distribute more than half the available doses of vaccine, and residents of counties that voted heavily for Trump in the last presidential election were more than twice as likely to die from COVID than from those that lived in areas that voted for President Biden. Trump failed to ban travel from Europe in January 2021. He announced a travel ban on the 31st of January on non-US residents who'd recently been in mainland China, but he did not shut down travel from Europe until the 11th of March, almost 6 weeks later, because of objections from his economic advisors. The outbreak in New York was seeded by travelers from Italy, and New York then seeded the rest of the country, becoming the primary source of new infections across the United States. Manhattan Judge Arthur Engoron oversaw the civil business fraud trial and ordered Trump and the Trump Organization to pay a $354 million penalty. The judgment, which is at least $500 million now, continues to accrue interest. He also barred Trump from running any New York company for 3 years and prohibited his sons, Don Jr. and Eric, from running any businesses in New York for 2 years. And yet Donald Trump somehow is still allowed to be on the ballot for US president. As someone who demanded absolute loyalty, Donald Trump didn't react well when officials disagreed with him, either publicly or privately. Officials often lost their jobs if Trump felt like they weren't doing his bidding, or if they contradicted him in public, even to stand up for the truth. There were firings, forced resignations, and premature departures, which ramped up in Trump's final year. The experts agreed Trump had the authority to take these actions, but they said he crossed a line by clearly retaliating against officials for personal reasons without good cause. You see, he's not just going to be a dictator for one day. On day one, Donald Trump was a dictator for 4 years. The Mueller investigation dominated the first 3 years of Trump's presidency. Angry over an investigation that he felt was illegitimate, Trump repeatedly lashed out at Mueller and took steps to undermine and obstruct the sprawling criminal probe. Mueller investigated 10 episodes and found persuasive evidence that Donald Trump's actions fit the legal criteria to warrant criminal charges. But Mueller decided not to make an up or down decision on whether to charge Trump, citing Justice Department rules against indicting a sitting president. A recurring theme of the Trump presidency was the personalization of government, with Trump regularly conflating his interests with the national interests and demanding personal loyalty from nearly everyone around him, as opposed to the law or the Constitution. Trump eschewed the regular process and never consulted with the Justice Department's clemency office, leading to some highly controversial pardons. Whilst allowable, these pardons undercut anti-corruption efforts and undermined the rule of law. Trump closed the loop in December 2020 by pardoning former aides Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos, who were convicted of lying or obstructing the Mueller probe, among other crimes. Trump pardoned his former strategist Steve Bannon, who was charged with defrauding Trump supporters in a Build the Wall scheme. The pardon was especially controversial given Bannon's violent rhetoric and ties to the Stop the Steal groups that attacked the Capitol on January 6. Trump pardoned war criminals. He showed a flagrant disregard of the rule of law by pardoning Blackwater contractors who massacred unarmed Iraqi civilians, including innocent women and children. Civilian casualties from U.S. drone bombings rose significantly under Trump, and the administration buried evidence of their crimes. Trump's support for the Saudi war in Yemen enabled horrendous atrocities. He launched indiscriminate bombing campaigns in Syria and Iraq. Trump politicized the Justice Department and FBI from the very start of his presidency until the final days. He repeatedly crossed lines and violated norms that have been in place since Watergate to create independence between the White House and federal law enforcement. Experts point to Trump's inflammatory and divisive rhetoric as a stark abuse of power, albeit not criminal and probably not impeachable. But they said Trump abused the bully pulpit by using his platform to brazenly spread lies and conspiracies, attack political opponents of all stripes, and praise bad actors like white nationalists and authoritarian leaders. Trump's attempts to cling to power reached a horrifying crescendo on January 6, when he incited a large gathering of supporters in Washington to attack the U.S. Capitol while the electoral votes were being counted. After he lost, he falsely claimed victory and pressured election officials in battleground states to fraudulently throw out millions of votes for President Joe Biden. The most memorable example was Trump's hour-long call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, when he harangued the GOP official to find just enough votes to nullify Biden's narrow victory in the state. His anti-labor stance allowed employers to exploit and abuse their workers more easily. His deportation policies ripped families apart. His choice to prioritize workplace immigration raids over workplace safety literally killed people. His environmental policies trashed the natural world, and he did everything in his power to escalate the climate catastrophe and stall progress towards a green economy, including ending U.S. membership of the Paris Climate Accord. It's not possible to list all of Donald Trump's crimes, from gassing protesters in D.C. to disappearing them in Portland, to siding with white supremacists in Charlottesville, to lying over 30,573 times while in office, as counted by the Washington Post. It is, however, far more important to pay attention to instances where Trump has caused real people tangible harm than to focus on the freak show of his bizarre, never-ending string of abusive rhetoric about politicians and celebrities and the media. His nicknames, his hatred of women and minorities, his suggestion of shithole countries. Trump is deeply flawed and unwell. He lacks the basic humanity and empathy to operate normally in society. He should be incarcerated, not just for his crimes, but because he is a danger to society. His Project 2025 is the next chapter to rebuild the US in the image of a far-right Christian nationalist administration, banning books on diversity, ethnically cleansing the nation, putting asylum seekers and unhoused people in internment camps, shutting down the Department of Education, the FBI and the Justice Department, jailing journalists and removing licenses from news networks who don't report on him favorably. Trump puts self over country. He loathes the laws we live by. He is unfit to lead America because he hates America and what it stands for. I never thought it would come to this. A reimagining of the worst dictators in history, all rolled into one violent, dangerous person. And that almost half of all voters think he is the right person to lead the United States. I'm Anthony Davis. You can catch me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show. with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.